Hello, everyone. I hope you can join us soon. So I'll give a brief outline of my talk. So it was in the following sections. Let's see if I can remember. Motivation. Why do we do full text search at all? So I kind of be interested in hear other people's opinions about this, but I have kind of two angles. One is simply it's hard to find things at scale. We've been cataloging by hand for 15 years at the UK Web Archive, and we've done a huge amount and really highlighted some of the most valuable items in our collection. But in that time, we've cataloged 150,000 URLs, which is an amazing achievement. But we get billions of resources, millions of web hosts every year, and so we all know, if the readers and our patrons know the URL, then they can go in Wayback, and that's great. But there's this big gap in the middle between the curated collections and individual URLs, and it's an attempt to try and fill that gap. So at least if they know the words in the pages, readers can get to what they want. So it's that finding things at scale is the primary motivation. Secondarily, and I think when I started my part of this process a long time ago, there was a vague idea of understanding our collections better through it, using these kind of tools to understand analytics, how the web has changed over time, its technologies and how it links and all that kind of thing. So a bit about motivation. The talk talks a bit about strategy. I won't go into too much detail here, only to say that for us, trying to encourage an open source and collaborative technical strategy is critical, because we think this is a shared problem and we best share it, solve it together. And we've also tried to be researcher led where possible. So in the past, we've partnered with researchers to drive the design strategy, if you like. In terms of the kind of state of things, we've come a long way since we started. One thing that I really wanted to highlight, and there's a nice diagram in the talk I encourage you to look at, is there's a lot wider tool ecosystem. When we started, there was our index, the UK Web Archives indexing tool, and a limited number of interfaces we built, which were a bit clunky and still are, to be honest. Whereas now you can use Solr as the backend, or you can use Elasticsearch. There's various tools you can point at Elasticsearch, which let you do analytics and clever stuff. And there's various user interface options, including particularly exciting is SolrWayback, which we'll be hearing more about in this time. So that's good. And in terms of the kind of, that's the good news, if you like, and the bad news is just because of our workloads and the time we've had over the last few years at the UK Web Archive, we have struggled with performance issues, and we've not managed to get to the bottom of them yet. So our search isn't as complete and as fast as we'd like. But the Danes are doing better, so it's probably just us doing something wrong. And so that's another area where we can look to collaborate in the future. So yeah, future plans, largely about getting our own house in order, getting our search functioning, but really wanting to help kind of grow this community through events like this and encourage collaboration through tools like SolrWayback or other end user tools to really drive what we do. Hope that's an okay summary of the talk. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. And I think we've got Youssef back, right?
Yes, I apologize for the technical difficulty I've had.
No worries. Yes. Good to have you back. So we can continue with the next introduction, and Youssef, now it's your session today.
Okay, so thank you very much, Andy. And in order of appearance, we have up next is Anders, along with Thomas and Toke from the Royal Danish Library, who had a very interesting presentation on SolrWayback. So Anders, if you'd like to give us a quick summary.
Yeah, so of course I agree with everything that Andy said. We want collaboration, and we can't do it alone. So SolrWayback is an open source tool that can be expanded upon. So in the presentation, I give, of course, like a brief overview of what is SolrWayback, but also the experiences that we had as curators, web archivists, and also external users like researchers. So it's a breakdown of things that we have tried. What do researchers actually like about SolrWayback? What did it solve? And for me, the really good thing is, of course, they're able to search better instead of clicking one URL at a time. So when I came at the library, I only knew SolrWayback because there was an early prototype. And then when I switched to OpenWayback, I was just like, oh, is this how you actually do it? and then we used 2.5, 3 years to actually get it in production in 2021. So I would say if you haven't watched the presentation, watch it. I'll give some links later to see what it can actually do, because it can do fabulous things like doing geosearch and EXIF data in pictures. How that's pretty significant. You can do all kinds of combinations that will find you specific documents. So yeah, and I'm looking forward to do more of the work in the future, and yeah, of course, collaborate.
Thank you very much, Anders. And up next, we have Ben O'Brien from the National Library of New Zealand, who shared with us in his presentation experience at the National Library of New Zealand getting started on implementing a full text search service. So Ben, if you'd like to also give us a quick summary.
Thanks, Youssef. So we're very much at the other end of the scale. We're just starting our full text search journey with web archives. We've been developing a pilot project to deliver some small web archive collections through full text search, and then we hope to test the feasibility of scaling that solution to gradually include more and more of our complete web archive. So far we've been using web archive discovery for indexing, Solr, and so far WarkLight as our front-end UI. We hope to start some extensive user testing soon with Victoria University of Wellington, who have a specific focus on one of the collections that we're including in the pilot. So from our perspective, we're really just standing on the shoulders of giants here in terms of the tooling, and trying to learn as much as we can from the UK Web Archive and the Danish Web Archive and others who are, have already treaded in this space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. I must say we are having a very good combination of presentations here, in my opinion. First of all, search is essential to digital information. I think it's what makes it special compared to non-digital, is the fact that you can search it and deal with very large data. As Andy pointed out in his presentation, when you're dealing with that kind of scale, it's difficult to do stuff manually. You need some automated way to query the collections you have. And search can be thought of as two parts. The first part is indexing, and the second part is actually providing the search service. And I think that's covered here. We have the UK Web Archive, who is the original author of the Web Archive Discovery Code, which includes the WARC indexer framework, which if you do any indexing of Web Archive data, you're probably going to be using that software. And we also have a very successful project for delivering a search service on top of Web Archive, SolrWayback. And that's all complemented with a very good example of how you can get started on full text search at a small scale and eventually growing to larger levels of scalability with Ben and the National Library of New Zealand. So I'm really excited to be having this discussion together with all of us, and I hope you'll all find it informative and very engaging. So we have the Q&A feature in Zoom, so anyone who has questions, please go ahead and use that feature to post your questions. And let me start with a few questions first of my own, if I may. I think it's always good to learn of the origin story of how each project got started. So I'm wondering if perhaps each of the presenters would kindly share with us a few words on how they first got started on each of the projects they presented today. So we can also go with order of appearance. So if we go to Andy, please, if you would have something to share about how you got started developing the Web Archive discovery tool, and which includes the work indexer framework.
Thank you. I went digging back. We thought this might come up. I came digging back in the Git history of what's going on. Sadly, I have to say that the core idea predates my joining web archiving. So I can't take any credit for that. I'm pretty sure Lewis Crawford with Helen Hawks got Roger Coram, if anyone remembers those names,
I do.
started. And so the initial commits in that Git repo belonged to Roger in 2011. I joined in 2012. So that was the initial choice, really, of let's get Apache involved, because we know we need to get text out of various formats, and we'll add the Internet Archive's WARC parsers to that, and we'll run it on Hadoop. So that's where it started when I joined. Part of my job since then was spent trying to generalize and work on that toolkit and focusing on reusability. So separating the core index apart from the Hadoop part. So you don't need a Hadoop cluster to run it. It's something anyone can run, but our Hadoop version builds on top of it, kind of thing. So really, my job has been refining that original design and trying to make it more reusable by others. Hopefully, what I'm hoping will happen longer term, which we can get into later, is bits of experience, at least from doing this, have started to get folded back into Apache itself. And in like a year or so ago, the National Library of Australia's WARC parsers that Alex Osborne wrote are now part of Tika. So we could start to move more of the tooling into the Tika toolkit, which I think is a positive way. So yeah, I mean, that's how I started. And you know, that and trying to write documentation on user interface options and trying to encourage a bit of reuse is my part of the story, I think.
Thank you very much, Andy. That's indeed very interesting. So, Anders, would you like to share with us a few words about how the SolrWayback project got started?
Yeah, and I think I'll throw the ball to Thomas, actually, because when I came, I just saw the prototype for SolrWayback and I thought, brilliant, now you can just free text search. And then, as I said, I experienced OpenWayback and saw that it was slow, it didn't have support for HTTPS and stuff like that. So Thomas, would you like to share how it actually started, because you're like the tech lead behind SolrWayback?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Well, it started as a fun project when we had spare time called Google Fridays at the Royal Library, and we could make anything we wanted. And I was looking in all the different collections we had, and the Netarkivet was one of them. And I started making a kind of Shine interface, and then it just, I looked at what fields we had, and then I tried how can we use those fields in a better way, and I made SolrWayback version 1. And later I got feedback from Niels Brygger and our own curators, and that's how it started.
And I can add that once we had the prototype and we saw that, okay, this can actually work, we made our project out of it. So one thing was to have actually the possibility for curators to do better QA. So it doesn't take like 7 minutes to load like a domain or URL, and also to be able to collaborate, because we don't have unlimited resources. We need to do this like an open source initiative. So if somebody wants to add a functionality to SolrWayback, they can do it, and we can all share like the rewards from that. So that was also something that was important from the library, that it's something that we contributed maybe to the society, but that it also would contribute back at some time in a great way. Like we had the WARC indexer, like we had OpenWayback and all other collaborations early on. So we definitely had used a lot of course time, but also like energy to make sure that this happened, because it was actually search discovery and playback was not that well at the Royal Danish Library at the time. So yeah.
Yes, and to answer the question from Jake about accessibility, If you're talking about internationalization, I18N, then it's actually part of the Vue front-end framework we are using. So it's very simple to use, just to define label and a text file with all the text file labels, and it just has to be done. There's no, it's not rocket science. I don't know if that's all accessibility questions you were referring to.
Yeah, thank you for addressing the question. That's indeed helpful. So let me remind everyone that we do have the Q&A feature in Zoom. So please, I see questions are already coming in. So please use that to post your questions. We'll be taking them after we finish with the introduction and initial questions. Yeah, thank you. So now, Ben, would you like to share with us something about the motivation or need you felt for implementing a full text search service for the New Zealand Web Archive?
So this is part of a bigger bunch of work that we started probably 2018, 2019, okay, about researcher access with our web archives. We started to map out big picture where we wanted to go in terms of just full text search, computational access, what sort of users we wanted to target. So we were thinking, big dreams, and we were doing a lot of experimenting with the Archives Unleashed toolkit at the time, and that kind of took our focus initially. So we had a lot of interest from universities around New Zealand wanting to work with our domain crawls. So this kind of drove that work with the Archives Unleashed toolkit, and we thought that might be the best place to start. So we were starting to size up the infrastructure we wanted to run the toolkit, and run it against our domain crawls. That kind of went into the bureaucratic wormhole and didn't get very far. About a year later, we had this opportunity to take a copy of an electronic text collection that was being hosted by the university in Wellington. This fitted quite nicely into what we had already been planning in terms of full text search, and it also gave us a nice collection that had a lot of interest and researcher use already within New Zealand that we could kind of hitch our wagon to with full text search. That kind of really started the ball rolling, and we've been working quite closely with the university to what we want to see in the interface, and also the harvest of this content as well. So it's kind of, there's two parts to it, but that's kind of where it came from for us.
Okay, thank you very much. That's also very interesting. Okay, so we do have questions coming in using through the Q&A feature, so maybe we can start taking some of those. So Daniel has a question related to ranking in search. So he says that Solr has been a big help for indexing web archive data, but the ranking problem is perhaps an issue. So any of our presenters would like to share with us if they have ran into issues with ranking in search results and how they perhaps dealt with that?
I can talk a bit about that. I mean,
yes,
it's I agree. It's a difficult problem. It's not been resolved. I'm afraid. So far, the researchers we've focused on serving are a bit weird, in the nicest possible way. They're not that bothered about the ranking. What they would like to do is take the data set and filter it down using search terms and facets, and then analyze the whole thing their own way, right? And so it's a different mode of access. However, we do find that our ranking for end users, for kind of normal users who are looking for a particular document, is quite primitive. Like I think on our production search service, we just like boost text matches that are in the title. It's very, it's very basic. And all our degrees, yes, it would be an area that could really do with more exploration. Maybe looking at, I know the Portuguese Web Archive has done a lot of work on full text search. Looking at that as well to take that in would be a good thing to do in the future. But yeah, I'm afraid we haven't. I just agree it's a difficult problem to address.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Okay, anyone else from panel would like to add to that? Okay, if not, we have more questions. So we have a question to both Andy and Ben from Eve, who asks if you envision yourself using SolrWayback at some point. Is that on your plans, Andy or Ben?
Yes, Andy.
Okay, so so the indexes, I'm just going to make sure the terminology is clear. Sorry, the indexes are the same in either case. SolrWayback's it's the user interface.
Sure.
We're looking at the user interface for currently it's deployed as an internal curator service, and thanks to our Danish colleagues for helping me get that to that point. We're going to see how we go with running it, maybe allowing some researcher access to it on limited grounds. Our public website has to meet certain accessibility legislation and be translated into multiple languages. And as Thomas pointed out, this is all possible within the Vue framework, but it's not done yet. So to run SolrWayback as our front end for the public, we'd have to look at the difficulties in taking it, or how much effort it's going to take to make it blend in with our website and meet those legislative requirements. But I imagine it will stay, and we'll keep it running as an internal stroke researcher service, and we're at the stage of evaluating whether it's going to be a public service in the future.
Okay, thank you. I think this also addresses the question, the follow-up question, whether you plan to implement SolrWayback at some point, whether you plan to deploy it at some point in the public-facing UK Web Archive service. What about you, Ben? Does the New Zealand Web Archive at some point plan to integrate SolrWayback for their search service?
Yeah, it's becoming increasingly likely that we will switch to it. So Wildlight has been good so far, but it has been a little challenging to work with different parts of it, and now that we Dockerized it, maintaining that has been a headache at times, just with the underlying Blacklight code base and working with Ruby and Rails hasn't been super fun from my perspective. So yeah, we're going to look at SolrWayback to probably replace what we're doing with Wildlight. Also, it looks like the support funding for Wildlight has ceased, so we don't really want to be taking on a tool that we are maintaining ourselves. We'd rather be using a tool that's used and supported within the community. So it seems like that's probably the right way to go at this point, using SolrWayback.
I was just going to add on that. This is a bit of an. It would be really good from the Iipc community to understand there are a lot of Blacklight shops out there, people that run Rails, and it so happens that no one involved in this work at the moment does. So we've looked at Blacklight and Walklight, and we've run it temporarily. The Danes have, New Zealand have, and none of us have the skills to maintain it. And for you know what it's like when you're in a framework you don't understand. Oh, you've got to do a security upgrade. Oh my God, the dependency tree. Oh my, what's going on? It's a really good start. Walklight's a really brilliant start. And if you're a Blacklight shop, it's beautiful, right? And it does, it's glossy, it looks nice, it's very, very polished. But it needs it needs to find its audience of people who want to support it. And so I'd encourage anyone who is running a blacklight shop, who's thinking about using web archiving full text search, to take a look and see if they're willing to kind of get behind it, because it's a good product, but it's not one, unfortunately, this team currently has any skills in supporting, which is a shame.
So at least with web archive discovery, you know, that it kind of makes it quite easy to swap out the UI. So we kind of knew that going in, you know, if Wireclight didn't pan out, then we weren't tying ourselves to anything. We could swap, you know, at any point. So that's kind of, yeah, that's good.
Okay, thank you both Andy and Ben. So there was also another question related to SolrWayback. So Anders, perhaps you can address this. So in your presentation, you mentioned that SolrWayback is much faster compared to OpenWayback. The question is, how does it compare to PyWB, and is SolrWayback a full replacement for PyWB?
Okay, Thomas, I'll get you in 2 seconds, but of course, I'll rephrase it a bit, because SolrWayback is both a search discovery, and then you do you choose to playback whatever you find. But you can specify alternative playback engines, a primary or secondary playback engine. So of course we have the PyWB project in Iipc. So you can just specify playback in PyWB. So you can do great playback in SolrWayback. But how is the community for doing the playback, you know, evolution and everyone doing it better in SolrWayback compared to PyWB? That's maybe an instance where we would like to at some point switch to search discovery in SolrWayback, and then the PyWB community will make sure that Facebook, Twitter, all kinds of hard to get content and hard to playback content is actually maintained. So it's about complementing. You can use it right off. It's much better than OpenWayback, and depending on how you have set OpenWayback, but I have some big domains where it's like takes 7 minutes to load like a domain that is harvested many times, and then it takes 15 seconds to load everything in SolrWayback. So you can use SolrWayback just as it is, but combine it with PyWB, then you're really great off. Thomas.
Yes.
Yeah, Thomas.
So very short, as Anna said, SolrWayback is 3 parts. There's the discovery, searching, then there's all the tools, visualization and extraction tools, very useful for curators. And finally, there's the playback. And for the playback, you can just configure it. Instead of open the SolrWayback playback, you just open the tab in PythonWayback. And SolrWayback is better and faster than OpenWayback, but it will never reach PythonWayback playback because of the post limitation. Levark indexer does not index post request very well, and social media like Facebook use a lot of post requests. But for a quick standalone, SolrWayback playback is good just to try it out of the box. But for national libraries, I recommend switch the playback to PythonWayback and keep the SolrWayback search rates.
Thank you, Thomas. I think this is one nice example of interoperability, or reusing other software, existing software within your software project. And that's always a good and healthy habit in software development. A general question, do we have any other examples of that to share with the audience? So here, for example, we have SolrWayback, which does very well the search in Solr and the researcher-oriented features. But here we are considering deferring the playback to another piece of software, PyWB here. Do we have any other examples of such reusability or interoperability between software in the Iipc ecosystem, software ecosystem?
One that springs to mind is our earlier, so before SolrWayback, we transitioned from OpenWayback to PythonWayback. And that's because the APIs those tools depend on are also fairly stable. So we use the OpenSearch lookup API, or you could use the CDX lookup API. And we use range requests over HTTP to get the WARC payloads. So a few years ago, we were able to switch from OpenWayback to PythonWayback without changing anything else, because those interfaces, which are how those tools interact with our collections, are the same. So I think that's another example of these kind of fairly stable APIs being used to delineate between components that change over time. The second example, which is in its early days, but I think will happen, is we're starting to see some effort to stabilize a kind of crawl specification, a crawl spec, and the work on the Browsertrix Cloud and Browsertrix Crawler are close, and Alex Osborne from the National Library's spec and some of the UK Web Archives tooling are close to having a shared description of the site that you want to crawl and the scope and that kind of thing. And that if that matures, that becomes another shearing layer, another point where we can start to, well, the crawler just needs to accept these crawl definitions, and the thing you write the definitions, it could be anything. And we can start to let tools evolve at different speeds along those boundaries. So that's a couple of kind of interoperability things that's going to mind.
Thank you very much, Andy. That's very helpful. Okay, I must apologize. It seems I'm having some trouble with Zoom, so the Q&A window seems to be somehow frozen on my end. So if there are other questions that are coming in, I would appreciate if someone could help with getting these questions through. In the meantime, yeah, go ahead, please.
Sorry, so I'm looking through some of the questions. Well, there was one earlier on from Catherine Schmidt about using Kibana and Grafana. Now, this might be in my talk. I referred to the fact that, and I looked it up. I'm not sure who they are. APONB, whoever they are. Welcome if you're here from Vienna. Added code to the indexer to support OpenSearch and Elasticsearch. And once those tools are so very popular that there's loads of front ends, you can just plug straight onto them, and you can start playing around and exploring in them. I'm not aware of anyone doing that with search data yet. We do that with crawl logs. Recent crawl logs get indexed in Elasticsearch, and we're using Grafana to poke around inside and see what's going on. But yeah, so I'm not aware of any other examples of that. Don't know if anyone else is.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Anders or Ben, anyone like to share in this? Okay. So very quickly, since you mentioned Andy Elasticsearch, one question I have in mind is we now have different indexing backends. So here we have Solr, we have Elasticsearch. For someone who's getting started with full text search for Web Archive, what would be some advice to help them make the decision whether to go with Solr or with Elasticsearch or any other solution?
Good question.
I mean, Solr seems to be the more popular choice, but is Elasticsearch also something to consider, depending on use case?
So, yeah, I mean, so if your institution supports one or the other, go with the one they support, is what I would say, probably. With the caveat that if you want to use SolrWayback and its features, you're going to have to run Solr. So I'm torn between a user-driven perspective and a kind of practical, what technology can you support in-house perspective. If they've already got expertise in Elasticsearch, then I would look at Elasticsearch. If you want to reuse SolrWayback, you'll have to start with Solr. I think there was a, this may have changed. My understanding of the relationship between the two is a long time ago, or some people have experimented with the two and have found Elasticsearch's kind of magical shard management of scaling out collections is a bit too magic for these very large text-heavy collections, and it kind of grinds to a halt. Now that was, as far as I know, that was years ago. So who knows? These days, maybe Elasticsearch on one of these auto-scaling kind of platforms will work better. Yeah, I'm struggling to give a concrete answer to that, because it depends mostly on what you're trying to achieve, what end user interface you want to use. But also I recognize that if your institution is already comfortable with Elasticsearch, then they'd probably rather use Elasticsearch, and I can't speak to that because I haven't done that myself. Sorry.
And was that on the cards for SolrWayback to have Elasticsearch support?
Good question, Ben. Yes. So, are there plans to support Elasticsearch in SolrWayback?
Well, you can ask Andy. Andy is Varg-indexer going to support Elasticsearch, because that's where it starts.
Yeah, no, it already
I
does.
believe it does.
So
Right.
the Vienna contributed code to index into Elasticsearch.
Okay, so I don't know how different is the schema.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
it brings up a lot of different, because we want to migrate to PyWB, but we have some kind of old absurd CDX that is not standard in any way. Could we have PyWB just look into the Solr index? I'm not so sure, but so it's like you talked about reusing stuff. We probably need to re-index our CDX anyways, but it could be great if we could just reuse the Solr index. But yeah, just get that kind of as a.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic to think about for the future.
That would be a good small project, but either a Python Wayback adapter to talk to Solr, or an implementation of the standard CDX API that's built on top of SolrWayback. Either of those it's an achievable project if we can get someone to work on it.
Yeah. So I think one question we have from the audience related somehow to that is Katerina asks about the use of Grafana and Kibana with web archives. Anyone from our panel would like to share experience about how they used Kibana or Grafana for visualizing data from web archives?
Sorry if I didn't do a very good job. I tried to answer that one earlier, Youssef. As
Okay,
far I don't,
sorry,
no, it's all right. I don't know, unless someone from Vienna can see what they've been doing with Elasticsearch. I don't know if anyone's been doing that with search data. So.
Okay. So we have about 5 minutes remaining in our time. Again, it's a very interesting topic that we're discussing here, and very glad we are having this engaging conversation.
There's a question from Vez at the end of the Q&A. Oh, Thomas is typing, sorry. Well, the question is, the team from Be Social in Belgium mentioned that they tried to use SolrWayback for indexing social media, but found that it doesn't, oh, it's gone. Oh, I think it's been answered.
Oh, yes.
Let's see.
Yeah, it doesn't index lazy loaded user text loaded as JSON. Is that something you're working on? So that's Thomas wrote one option. So this is the problem: is you're going to a website, but the WARCs record the JSON the API delivered, and you don't get a copy of the separate page that was created in kind of, or would have been created. So one option is you configure the WARC indexer to index the JSON, and that gets you to the JSON files. One thing which I'm looking for can be interesting in the future is in the context of browser-based crawling, you can record the text as it ended up in the browser as a separate additional record. So the kind of the rendered DOM can get its own separate WARC record, like taking a screenshot, but the actual text. And if those are integrated into the WARCs, then you can index those instead of the kind of bare URLs, if you like, for those URLs, and that would let you find the full kind of rendered pages and get you to them. But that's all. That isn't happening yet. It's just something I know kind of talked to with Ilya and Web Recorder about doing. UK Web Archive does render seeds during crawls, and we do keep that text in the works, but we've not done any work on exposing that through search yet.
And I can just add, because we did some tests with, so we have an Archive subscription, and that it puts somehow the text from, for instance, Facebook posts in the WARC file, and we used Archive web page and Conifer where it doesn't put it. So you can, if you do like a lot of harvesting with these tools, then you can actually play back and see posts and comments with Archive web page, but you can't free text search it because the JSON is not indexed. So it's definitely something to figure out how can everything kind of be in the WARC file. So I think it's important that you can, of course, search for Facebook comments or whatever it is you're getting down, one way or another.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes remaining in our time, and I think we tried to answer most of the questions we could during the time. So I would definitely like to thank very much all of our presenters, Andy Jackson, Anders, Thomas, and Toke, and Ben. It has been a very interesting and engaging conversation, and I'm sure we have the Slack channel. If anyone is interested in continuing that discussion, we can always get in touch there. And there is definitely a lot of work to be done in the area of search and indexing and discovery in web archives.